This is question 4 of LSAT PrepTest 157, second section, the first logical reasoning section over at lawhub.lsac.org. And as always, we're going to read the question stem first for number 4. Which one of the following, if true, most weakens the economist's reasoning? Well, we can see it's an economist, so I don't really need to highlight the economist's reasoning. But we do need to highlight that task of a weakened task. So we know what we have to do. We're going to read the statements by the economist. We are going to highlight the conclusion of that economist for clear reference, and then try to mentally predict what a broad way to weaken that claim might be as best possible, understanding that generally with earlier questions in the section, it's more easily done as far as a prediction. So, reading the economist statements, our country needs as much capital as possible from overseas investors in order to sustain our economy. Hence, we cannot afford any reduction in the amount of capital that overseas investors have invested there. They're invested here. Therefore, to sustain our economy, we should pass laws making it much more difficult for overseas investors to remove their capital. Now, we do have two transition indicators that might lead into a conclusion with hence and therefore. And when this happens, you just want to consider the direction of support. Does the second sentence in this case support the third sentence, or does the third sentence support the second sentence? And it should be relatively apparent that the second sentence about not being able to afford any reduction in the amount of capital that is invested by overseas investors is directly leading to the final recommendation from the economist, which is we should pass laws making it much more difficult for overseas investors to remove their capital. So mentally, we just want to have a broad prediction of we need to find an answer choice that says no, actually, passing laws making it harder for overseas investors to remove their capital is actually going to make that amount of capital in the country go down in some fashion. So, with that mental prediction, we now go to the answer choices, starting with choice A. To sustain its economy, the country needs to diversify its investments more evenly across the country's industries. We never actually mentioned the industries at all. This is going to need as much additional information as we can possibly get, and therefore cannot definitively weaken the economist's reasoning, so we can eliminate choice A almost immediately. Next, choice B. Laws that would make it more difficult for overseas investors to remove their capital would strongly discourage them from investing any additional capital. So here's the bad side effect of this recommendation for new laws, making it harder for the overseas investors to remove their capital. If these laws go into place, well, then they're not going to invest more. So basically, I could just highlight this part and know that this is the side effect that would definitely make us not want to follow the economist's recommendations. So we should be able to select B proactively at this point. Now, if you're actually in the exam, you very well may move on from here, but just for the purposes of this video, we will go through the remaining answer choices, finding reasons to highlight, to eliminate, and as we read choice C, the historical periods during which the country's economy had the highest rate of growth. Well, we're not concerned with the absolute highest rate of growth, and you may actually, if you're going to confirm that your answer is correct by reviewing choices C, D, and E, which I'm not necessarily against if you can do it efficiently, we might catch highest rate of growth and immediately go, I don't even have to read the rest of this. We're not concerned with the absolute highest rate of growth, so we'll eliminate C. Then choice D. In countries other than the economists, passage of laws that made it very difficult for overseas investors to remove their capital have not entirely prevented the removal of capital invested by overseas investors. Okay, have not entirely prevented. So has it prevented 99%? Has it prevented 50%? Has it prevented 1%? I have no idea. This couldn't be a much more vague qualifier if it tried, so we can eliminate D for that ambiguity almost immediately. And then choice E, 2 years ago, the country enacted laws that place some restrictions on the removal of capital by overseas investors. Well, what are the details about those restrictions? I have no idea. What happened afterwards in the intervening time? I have no idea. So once again, we need additional information about those restrictions in order to appropriately and definitively say that that the information in this choice would weaken the economist's argument, whereas choice B rather directly did accomplish the task of weakening that argument.